He's alive!
Who?
Mama Kemi. Impossible. We buried her. You saw a ghost.
Hunger can confuse the eyes. Are you sure you're not hungry, Tunde?
Mama Kemi! Is that you?
They buried her with tears. They sealed the grave with prayers. So explained why a woman screamed her name at a roadside food stall 3 villages away. In Keturah village, mornings did not truly begin until Mama Kemi opened her stall. Her place sat where the road narrowed and widened again, as if the village itself paused there before moving on. The walls were old clay, the roof patched many times over. Nothing about it looked special, and yet people planned their days around it. Children arrived barefoot, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Farmers stopped there before heading to the fields. Travelers slowed their steps without knowing why. Mama Kemi never called out to customers. She never needed to. Her presence was an invitation. She was not young, but she was not old either. Her face carried soft lines that spoke of laughter more than worry. Her eyes, always attentive, always calm, seemed to notice things others missed. When people spoke to her, they felt listened to, even if she said very little in return. No one remembered when she arrived in Keturah. She had simply always been there. Some said she came after a flood years ago. Others claimed she followed a trading caravan and decided to stay. When asked, Mama Kemi only smiled and said, "I stopped walking." That answer never quite satisfied anyone. Yet no one questioned her further. Mama Kemi had no husband. When women teased her gently, she laughed. When elders asked if she had children somewhere, she shook her head. "Everyone here is enough," she would say. And somehow, it never sounded like loneliness. Her food was simple, but people spoke of it with reverence. Warm porridge in the mornings. Stews thick with patience, not just spices. Bread that stayed soft long after it cooled. People said her meals settled the stomach and the mind. If someone arrived angry, they left quieter. If someone arrived burdened, they left lighter. No one could explain it. Mama Kemi had a habit that unsettled some people, though few spoke of it aloud. She never rushed. Even when the line was long. Even when the sun burned fiercely. She stirred slowly, served gently, as if time itself bent around her movements. Once, a trader complained loudly about waiting too long. Mama Kemi listened without interrupting. Then she served him last. And added extra. The trader never complained again. Children adored her. Not because she spoiled them but because she noticed them. She remembered which child feared dogs. Which one struggled to read. Which one came to school hungry. Sometimes when no one was watching, she packed small bundles of food and pressed them into tiny hands. "Walk carefully," she would whisper. No one ever saw her count money afterward. Yet, for all her warmth, there was something about Mama Kemi that made people hesitate. It was the way she sometimes paused mid-stir, her eyes drifting toward nothing in particular. The way she hummed tunes no one recognized. The way she locked her stall every night without fail, even though theft was unheard of in Keturah. And perhaps most strangely, no one had ever seen where she slept. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Mama Kemi forgot a name. It was a small thing. Almost nothing. But the village noticed. Then she dropped a spoon one morning. Then she leaned against the counter a little longer than usual. When people urged her to rest, she smiled. "My hands are tired," she said once. "But my work is not finished." Those words followed her. The day she died did not feel different at first. She cooked. She served. She laughed with the children. But as the sun dipped, her voice softened. By nightfall, she lay down behind her stall, beneath the same tree where she often rested. And never rose again. The cry that followed tore through Keturah like a wound. Men ran. Women wailed. Children clung to her wrapper, refusing to let go. She looked untouched, as though sleep had claimed her gently, not death. They buried her before sunset, behind her stall, under the tree. And with her burial, the village lost something it could not name. Food returned to Keturah, but comfort did not. People still ate, but they did not linger. The stall stayed shut. Dust gathered where laughter once lived. And slowly, Mama Kem became a memory people spoke of softly, as though raising their voices might disturb something unseen. 3 months later, a trader named Tund took the eastern road. His journey carried him across hills and into a town that did not know Keturah's grief. By late afternoon, hunger slowed his steps. Then he smelled it. Warm. Familiar. Impossible. He followed the scent to a roadside stall. A woman stood there, purring, humming, low. Tund stopped breathing. Because the way her hands moved, the way she tilted her head slightly as she tasted the stew, he had seen it 1,000 times before. "Mama," he whispered. The woman looked up and smiled. Tund did not step closer. He did not speak again. He simply stood there, rooted to the dusty ground, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain others could hear it. The woman before him looked solid. Not like smoke, not like shadow. Her wrapper was faded at the edges, just as he remembered. Her hands were strong, steady, moving with the same patient rhythm. The fire crackled beneath the pot. Steam rose. The smell was unmistakable. This was not imagination. This was not hunger. This was Mama Kem. She did not ask him to sit. She did not call his name. She simply scooped food into a bowl and placed it on the wooden table in front of him, as though she had been expecting him all along. Tund's throat tightened. People around him were eating normally, laughing, joking, complaining about prices. No one screamed. No one ran. To them she was just another roadside cook. To him she was a woman buried 3 months ago. His hands trembled as he touched the bowl. Warm. Real. His mind screamed at him to leave, to run, pray, to reject whatever this was. But his body did the opposite. Yep. And the moment the food touched his tongue, something inside him broke. Tasted like home. Not just Keturah. Not just memory. Tasted like being safe. Tund's eyes filled with tears. Across the table, Mama Kem watched him quietly. Then someone behind him spoke. "Madam, add more pepper." Mama Kem turned, just for a moment. And in that moment, the wind rose sharply, whipping dust into the air. The fire hissed. The pot rattled. When Tund blinked, the stall was gone. The fire was out. The pot lay on its side, spilling stew into the sand. And Mama Kem was nowhere. Screams followed. People jumped back. Bowls shattered. Someone shouted her name. Another person swore loudly and ran. Within seconds the roadside was chaos. Tund staggered backward, his chest tight. His heart racing with terror and wonder tangled together. He did not wait. He ran. By the time he reached Keturah, night had fallen. He did not go home. His feet carried him straight to the village square. People noticed him immediately. Before anyone could ask a question, he shouted, "She is alive!" The square froze. Some laughed nervously. Some frowned. Some stepped backward. "Who?" someone asked. Tund swallowed. "Mama Kem." The name hit the air like thunder. Women gasped, men shook their heads violently. "Impossible! We buried her. You saw a ghost." Hunger can confuse the eyes. But Tund did not stop. He described everything. The smell, the fire, the food. He spoke of her hands, her humming, the way she smiled at him like nothing had changed. And when he described how she vanished, silence fell. A heavy, suffocating silence. Fear crept in slowly. Mothers began calling their children inside earlier than usual. Doors were bolted at night. Conversations dropped into whispers. People asked questions they did not want answers to. What if eating her food was a mistake? What if she returned for a reason? What if death had unfinished business? Some remembered old stories their grandparents told. Stories of souls who lingered when their purpose was incomplete. Others rejected the idea violently. She is dead, they insisted. Dead people do not cook. But doubt had already taken root. 3 days later, an old woman collapsed in the market. She did not die. But when she woke, she whispered something that spread like wildfire. I smelled Mama Kem's stew. Just before I fell. Panic followed. That night no one slept. The elders gathered at dawn. They spoke quietly, gravely. This was no longer gossip. This was fear beginning to shape behavior. They sent for the priests. Men known for long fasting, deep prayers, and knowledge of things unseen. When the priests arrived, they listened. They did not laugh. They did not argue. They closed their eyes. Prayers filled the air. Incense burned. Symbols were drawn into the earth. The village held its breath. Finally, the oldest priest spoke. Not all returns are curses, he said. He spoke of souls bound not by anger, but by love. Of people whose lives were so defined by service that death itself did not immediately release them. She did not come to harm, the priest said slowly. She came too. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But why not return home? Someone asked. The priest's eyes darkened. Because sometimes, he replied, home does not need you anymore. But somewhere else does. The words settled uncomfortably. People remembered how they had urged Mama Kem to rest, but still relied on her daily. How they had loved her, but expected her to give endlessly. How they buried her and moved on. From that day, fear softened into reflection. People stopped locking their doors in panic. They began speaking of Mama Kem not as a ghost, but as a presence. Travelers continued to whisper of a woman along distant roads. Cook whose food healed more than hunger. A smile that lingered long after she disappeared. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind passed through Keturah at dawn, carrying a familiar scent, people paused, not in fear, but in gratitude. After the priest's words, life in Keturah slowly found its rhythm again. But it was not the same rhythm. People cooked, yes. They laughed again, yes. Children returned to the paths, yes. Yet something invisible had shifted. The villagers began to notice themselves. A woman who used to chase hungry children away from her door now paused, and added extra food to the pot. A man who once complained loudly about prices began paying quietly. Neighbors who had ignored one another for years started asking, "Have you eaten?" It was as though Mama Kem had left something behind that could not be buried. Months later, travelers brought more stories. Always the same description. A woman who cooked slowly, who never shouted, who never counted money twice. Who vanished the moment someone tried to thank her too loudly. Some said she disappeared when her food was finished. Others said she vanished when kindness was returned instead of taken. And one detail appeared in every story. She never served people who came only to mock or test her. One evening, Tund sat alone near the old stall in Keturah. Dust had gathered there, but the mango tree still stood. He remembered the day Mama Kem told him, "Some people feed mouths, others feed lives." He finally understood. She had not returned because she was restless. She had returned because kindness, once practiced long enough, becomes instinct. Even death could not stop it. The elders eventually agreed on something that surprised everyone. They did not forbid speaking her name. They encouraged it. They told the children her story, not as a warning but as a lesson. That goodness is not wasted. That service leaves footprints. That love does not end where breath does. And to this day, in villages where people feed strangers without asking questions, in towns where a bowl of food is given before judgment, in places where kindness appears quietly and leaves without applause, some say Mama Kem has already passed through. Not as a ghost, not as a miracle, but as a reminder. Because in our land, they say, when a life is lived only for others, even the grave cannot keep it. So if one day you receive unexpected kindness from a stranger, food that feels like home, help that asks for nothing in return, do not be quick to explain it. Just eat, Just accept. Just remember. And ask yourself, what kind of life am I living that would refuse to stay buried?